Hi everyone, Angus Campbell here. So it's now Friday the 16th of August. So following up on from the last video, just to tidy up, so we were just placing the final fitments on the gearbox inner cover here, and I've actually completed one more on the other side, which I'll just show you before we move on to the outer cover, and that is to fit a small pin there for this thrust washer, which is the lay shaft thrust washer on the other side of the gearbox inner cover. So that is now ready to fit onto this side of the engine. I'll just place it there for the moment, just to give you some idea if I can do it with one hand. There she goes. And I was going to tap it on with my rubber mallet, but I haven't got that handy. Let's use the there she goes. So you get the general idea. And I have done one test fit, and the reason I'm not going to put this all the way on now is because the inside diameter of that bearing does fit onto the main shaft, but it's very tight. And also on the reverse side of this inner case, which I'll show you if I can get it off again now with one hand. There she comes. Then we need to dress off a bit of this casting here. Now, whether this was machined from the factory or intended to be machined originally from the factory to smooth this surface off, I don't know. But what we're finding is that this cog on the lay shaft is actually fouling against this piece of the casting on the bearing retainer before it then butts up to the thrust washer. There's a bit of a, I don't know if you can see that, you can see there's a bit of a step between the surface of the thrust washer and actually this this bearing retaining casting. So we just need to trim some of that off there to enable this then to fit flush, but we're only talking, you know, about less than a millimetre to do that. So that's just one final job on that inner casing, and then that's done. So yeah, pretty pleased with that. And so we can move on then to the outer casing. Now, this is upside down at the moment, and what we've got to do then is fit the gear change mechanism here above the clutch actuating mechanism. But first things first, we just need to drill out a little bit further this hole here, which allows for an interference fit of a small spigot that acts as the one of the retainers for the kickstart spring. So we'll just do that first. The small spigot for the kickstart spring is 9.53 millimeters diameter according to the micrometer. So we'll take this out to probably about 9.5 drill bits in steps, and I'll bring you back once that's pressed in. Okay, quick bit of drilling later, just going up through 3 bits. Then we've got that pressed in there. It's not quite as tight as I would like it. However, I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem because there's not many places it can go once you've got the spring and the Kickstarter in place. So that's that done, and now we can move on to mounting up the gear change lever, etc. on these mounting points here. So we'll take it out of the vise and we'll do it on the bench. Okay, so this is the outer cover. We've got the spring spigot fitted in. I've just been doing a bit of dressing of the kickstart spindle and its sprocket, and on the other side of this, in the inner cover, then with respect to just doing a bit of a test fit with this, then I've realised that this does fit well, but the kickstart stop that we inserted yesterday just did need to go a bit further in, so that the kickstart quadrant would clear it, but also this stop doesn't need to be protruding so far, because there is an actual stop that abuts it on the other side of the kickstart quadrant. So basically, if we put that back in there, that now stops, moves freely all the way around, which is good. When you can imagine that the pinion, the kickstart pinion from the main shaft, will be on the other side of the main shaft sticking through here, then this is how the kickstart engages when you kick down. It's a left-hand kickstart on this, so that's why it looks a bit odd. But what we ought to be able to do now with the outer cover is just fit this with the kickstart spindle through its bush here, to ensure that we've got a nice snug fit. So again, trying to do this with one hand is a bit awkward. There we go. So that now fits. It's all snug, no gaps, and it turns. So that's part one completed. So the next part is to fit the gear change spindle onto the inner cover here. So let's just turn this the right way up. There we go. And that fits on these three mounting points here. And once that's in, again, we need to do a test fit to make sure everything fits together snugly with no gaps. So I'll just get the parts together for that now. Okay, so there's all the parts laid out. What we've got then is we've got the gear change spindle, and that operates once inserted onto the gear change quadrant in this half. So if you imagine that the gear change spindle is inserted in its hole like so, it's got an oil seal on it. Can't press that in for now anyway. And then we've got its retainer, which goes on top like so, and then we fit the return springs, one on either side of the central pin here, and then we put the spring retainer on top, and we insert 2 bolts here and a countersunk screw there to hold the whole lot onto the case. The reason why this mounting point has to be countersunk is that obviously the kickstart spindle and sprocket rotates over the top of that, so you can't have anything protruding because it is a tight fit. So what we'll do then is I'll set you up on a stand, and we'll put this together and begin to do some test fits. I think what we're going to find is that this, when bolted down, actually tightens up the gear change spindle too much, and therefore you can't turn it. And then if we put some spacers in to try and release that pressure, we find that this back end of this actually fouls then the kickstart. So it's all a bit of a balancing act. But let's get set up here and we'll see where we go. Okay, what I've done is I've put the gear change spindle in, pushed it all the way through, and I've put the gear lever loosely on the other side so we can use that as a bit of a lever. And here on the top of this you can see the spring-loaded plungers that engage with the gear selector quadrant that's in the inner case. And what I'm going to do now is we've got very little space to play with here, and if we're not careful, when we put the retaining plate on top of this, which is also the housing for the return springs here, when this is clamped down, this actually presses or clamps the spindle too tightly, so it's very, very stiff. But at the same time as well, if we pack it out slightly to bring this plate up a little, then down here where we've got the bush for the kickstart shaft, the kickstart quadrant sits above this, like so, and we've got to have enough enough of a clearance to allow the kickstart quadrant, when we kick it, to actually move above the gear change shaft retaining plate, because it goes above here. Let me just put that back on again, like so. Now these aren't in properly just yet, but this has to turn above that. So this plate has got to be in sort of with sort of tolerances on one side to ensure that the gear shaft moves without too much stiffness, but on the other side is tightened down far enough so that the gear change quadrant can move above it without fouling it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fit this top plate with bolts, but without the springs and the spring retaining plate first. I'm going to put a couple of very thin packing shims underneath the plate on these two mounts here, but I'm not going to do that here. And although this will mean it's slightly skew width, I think there's enough tolerance in that spindle there to allow for that, so that it means that it's sort of a halfway house. We get a bit more clearance for the gear change mechanism at the top here to be able to move against the springs, but down the bottom here it's as tight up against the case as we can get it, so that we've got good clearance then for the kickstart quadrant. So I'll just mount this up loosely now. Okay, that's test fitted, and that works quite well actually. Let's see if you can see that. There it goes. It's moving with me just gently moving the gear change lever on the other side. You can see the spindle moving there. So nice and free but firm. So what we can do now is take these two bolts out again, and we'll put the springs in. This is this way around, obviously, with the retaining plate. And one thing to bear in mind is that these springs do have these small what would you call them? Small little pressure plates on the end of them, so that the tiny little spindle there isn't pressing directly on the springs. It's on a plate, a pressure plate, effectively little pressure plates. So we'll get that together and I'll bring you back. Okay, success I think. So we've got the springs in behind the retaining plate here, bolts are in, bolted up. The gear chain, the kickstart spindle and its quadrant are in. it does just catch that spindle there, or it doesn't catch, it just scrapes it slightly. Just catches it. So I think what we'll do is we might have to trim that a little bit with the grinder, just to grind a little tiny bit off. But other than that, success. The gear lever goes down and up and returns and is nice and free. So I think that's the outer cover fitments complete. So we'll leave this one there, and for the next video then what we'll do is we'll fit both the inner cover and the outer cover with all their accoutrements, hopefully onto there. Screw them up, and we should be there then. So that's it for now. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Appreciate your interest, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.